Greetings, Off-Season After Dark fans. Glad to have you here for episode 49. And we get into another Big Ten episode, one I've wanted to do for a while. We're lucky enough to have Roman here from Locked On Huskies to talk about UW, Jedd Fisch, Damon Williams, and everything else in the UW ecosphere. So should be a fun one. A team who obviously has a national title appearance in recent years and is coming off of a 9-win season. So Roman, glad to have you here. You're, I think, my first guest outside of our group who I actually had communicated with before starting the show. So it's good to have someone with, a crossover and some background here. So why don't you tell the guests a little bit about what got you following Huskies, what got you, producing content and, in this world?
Oh, absolutely. I've watched the Huskies my entire life. I grew up in Los Angeles, so people are a little stunned to learn that at different points in time. But my dad's a UW alum. Okay. My sister actually just graduated from one of their master's programs a couple of months ago. So something that has run in my family for a very long time. My dad lived up here for a long time. So I came up here every single summer, visited, got to walk around the stadium and all that. And it's just something that I've always really enjoyed. And then as I got into high school, into college, and I realized that sports media was something that I wanted to do, as I was going to school, and I went to a small D3 school in Massachusetts where I could play baseball for a little bit. And
I did the same with the small D3 school in Minnesota and played football.
Oh, it's tremendous. It was a wonderful experience. And as I kind of continued to learn and saw just kind of where the market was going, I was like, oh, there's a great market here for college football. I started writing about the Huskies while I was still in school, decided to move out here when I was done with college. And I was lucky enough to live with my grandma for a little while and work at a local newspaper before obviously things change with COVID. And now that, I was able to get some more opportunities, it's been tremendous to be able to do more of this. And I've been lucky enough that this is my 6th full season now covering the Huskies. And it's,
okay.
Yeah, no, it's, it just hit me that it has been a while.
How long have you been doing Locked On Huskies?
This will be our 4th football season of Locked On Huskies.
Now, are you the original Locked On Huskies, or did you inherit it from somebody else?
No, it's been me the whole time. I had a full-time co-host for a little while, and then now it's we got like a really fun rotating cast of people that step in and help out from our tremendous beat.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, well, because I know we're in that phase now where Locked On's been around long enough where some people are still the originals, some have taken over from somebody else. So good to know. Yeah.
No, me since day one, and it's been quite a ride to see where it's come.
Yeah, I mean, there are not many schools who have had the high level success, but also the overall changes in conference realignment and everything that's happened there. So there's certainly, you've not been short of news going on in that time. So that's always a positive. But let's jump into the Huskies, and a team who last year, won 9 games. The year before they were 6-7, Jedd Fisch's first year. Of course, the year before that you had a national title appearance. But kind of the place I always start was at the end of last season, after you won the bowl game, finished 9-4. How did you guys feel about the season? And what was feeling after the 2025 season was over?
So at the end of 2025, it was kind of like, all right, this is solid, where you left one very clear win on the table at Wisconsin. That was a game that should have gone the other way.
Yeah.
And then you kind of look at the other 3 losses that you suffered. It was at Michigan and then at home against Ohio State and Oregon. And we saw how those seasons ended up. So, I mean, it's one of those things where you kind of have to go back to 2024 to really grade what 2025 was, because we saw half of the roster depart at the end of the 2023 season, whether it be for the portal, to follow Kalen DeBoer, go elsewhere, that graduated, that left for the NFL draft. So 2024 was really this year of, all right, what is Jedd Fisch going to be able to do? And even then, you left some wins on the table where you go and look at the Washington State game that year, the Rutgers game. And then you could have been looking at how 2025 shaped up very, very differently if those 2 results, which were both 1-possession games, swing the other way. And so it's one of those things where I think that the general vibe with what 2025 should be was, all right, this is solid. This is a nice foundation to be able to build, where you saw so much young talent step up all over the field, as I'm sure we'll dive into.
Yeah.
And it was also,
I'm saying you guys were one of the few teams I've talked to where if you look at your losses from last year, you actually played pretty good defense in all of them against good teams. That's not the case with most people. It's a lot of these, we're seeing, well, this game we lost and we allowed 45. Well, no, your guys' losses, you allowed 24 to Ohio State, 13 to Wisconsin, 26 against Oregon. Those are playoff teams, and you didn't allow 30 points against them. Like, that's pretty good.
Absolutely. Didn't allow 30 points all season. Like 26 was the most points that Washington's defense allowed last year.
Really impressive. Yeah.
And it's one of those things where looking at who's coming back, looking at the talent that you are still able to build around moving forward, there's a lot to like. And there's a lot to just kind of say, okay, yeah, there are still major questions that need to be answered when you lose guys like Denzel Boston, like Jonah Coleman. But looking at where the roster is and how Jedd Fisch has continued to construct this thing, looking ahead, it's okay. Yeah, no, this is a team that should be able to take another step forward this fall, is because it's going to be led by, as you said, Mike, that defense.
Yeah. And I think that gets lost in the shuffle a bit. Ryan Williams really, really struggles as a head coach at Purdue.
Ryan Walters.
In over his head. Didn't I say Ryan Walters?
You said Williams.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I was crossing brainwaves with the QB. Ryan Walters. Yeah. But top-notch defensive coordinator. Was at Illinois, is now again at Washington. The guy's a really good defensive coordinator. And because of that, I think that will give him an opportunity to be a head coach again someday. And I believe he can succeed in the right situation. He was just in a bad spot before. But make no mistake, elite defensive mind in the country.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things where when there were those rumors about Tennessee trying to move in on him at the end of the season, I would hearken back to something he told us in November, where he talked a lot about how his defenses have historically taken a big step forward from year 1 to year 2. And that's certainly something that he seems to expect this year as well, where this is a group that was 12th in the nation in run defense last year, 15th in points per game allowed, and 21st in total defense. So it's already building on a very, very solid foundation. Yeah. And I kind of look at some of the pieces they brought in from the transfer portal, some of the pieces that are sticking around, and some of these freshmen that this coaching staff also expects to contribute. It's one of those things where I can certainly see what the plan is and what the vision is. And it also goes back to one of the things that makes him such an elite defensive mind is he talked a lot about how he had to change his base scheme last year, what he typically likes to run, because he just didn't have the personnel that he felt could apply adequate pressure up front. There were a couple different things on the back end where when you have guys like Takario Davis and Ephesians Prysock on the outside, you want to make sure you can do certain things with those sorts of corners. And so now looking at how Washington has reshaped this entire defense moving forward and adding pieces from the transfer portal, especially along the defensive line, I'm very curious to see how he's going to mix what he learned last year with what it is he likes and does really well moving forward.
The one thing I can tell you he does like from an outside perspective is tall, rangy corners.
Yes.
That's
not changing this year.
No. And that was one of the things I was going to ask later when we get into the roster and the D-backs. I'm like, are you going to have corners that are 6'3", 6'4"? Because he clearly likes those guys.
There are a couple of those that we'll dive into.
And the other thing that I always look at when I'm doing my rundown of looking at defenses, the tackling rate. They were 13th in the country in that last year. That tells me you're stressing fundamentals if you're that good at tackling. So, because that's something that being sound at tackling and not whiffing on that doesn't happen by accident. D1, FBS, running backs, receivers are very good at eluding tackles. Being good at tackling doesn't happen by accident. So that's something there. And on the offensive side of the ball, I couldn't find this definitively. Is Jedd Fisch the play caller?
Yes.
Okay. I assumed he was based on what I read, but I wanted to clear that up before we went any further. So that is not shocking. I did assume that was the case. But you also have some other very experienced and highly thought of, assistant coaches. Scotty Graham is a guy who's coached at a lot of places, well respected. JP Lossman, Luke Del Rio, guys who, we've heard, their names certainly back to when they were players and elsewhere. So, and then the one I didn't realize until I was looking around was Brian Odom, but a guy who, Mizzou, Oklahoma, USC, Washington State before that, coached at a lot of places. Younger brother of Barry, for those out there who didn't know that, but another top-notch name. But so I think you conceptualized that well. Of in grading 2025, we had to look at where we came from 2024. So then we hit the off season and recruiting, the portal. I think the spot we have to start here was keeping Damon Williams after thinking we would. Then we weren't so sure. Then we did. So what did that scenario look like for you guys, for the people in the space like you focusing on UW football? How did that unfold?
That was a really interesting 72-hour period where I remember I was sitting there and I was like, oh, cool. News is starting to die down for a little bit. I can take a step back and, it's going to get easier for a little bit. I remember finishing recording one of my shows and looking at my phone and I had like 25 texts and people would tell me, what's going on? Like, I'm so sorry. Like, what is this? And then I checked it because, because it was something that came out of nowhere. And Jedd Fisch did a really good job of talking about this on the Triple Option podcast. I want to say it was
good to know.
A week or two ago.
Oh, yes, where I saw a small clip of it, not the entirety. Yeah, I don't know the whole thing.
So where he just said that there were people in his corner that were giving him bad advice and were so certain that he was going to get this extra $2 million after he had already signed his deal at Washington. And so it was a very, very just weird, shaky sort of period where it was, well, hey, where did this come from? And there are people who are still probably going to be mad about that heading into the season. I can tell you with 100% certainty, it's not an issue in the locker room. It's not an issue where there's any sort of rift between him and the coaching staff or anything like that. But it was one of those things where there's no way around it. Like, yeah, people are going to be mad and it sucked because you were losing somebody who is widely expected to be one of the best quarterbacks in college football this year. So bringing him back.
Yeah. And I'm glad to hear you say that, because the way that unfolded, there was a chance this snowballed into what happened with Nico and Josh Heupel, where there were irreconcilable differences you needed to separate. I'm glad that's not the case for the sake of that team this year.
And it's one of the things that Jedd Fisch did explain, where he said, I've coached at the NFL level for long enough to know that, hey, players are going to ask for trades and then not always be granted said trade. And at the end of the day, it was something where he was away from the team for less than 72 hours. It wasn't like, it's this weeks, months long holdout where he doesn't want to talk to his teammates. He doesn't want to give in kind of deal. No, that's not what happened. And so that's where it was somewhat easy to reconcile from what I've heard, because he went through all of the winter conditioning. Obviously, he went through all of spring practice as well. So I look at where this is going to be moving forward. That's not necessarily something that I'm concerned about, but that is obviously, the big thing and where you have to start, because when several different programs, obviously LSU being the one that was the heavily rumored suitor at the forefront, it was a very interesting couple of days. And I heard a lot of rumors flying around about who might have been coming up on an official visit after Bo Pribula did very briefly. That just feels like a weird moment in history at this point in time. And looking to the future, were those guys be better than DeMond? Probably not. But it was one of those things where you kind of had to make the best of the situation.
Yeah. And when something like that would have happened that late in the portal window, it's not necessarily about finding a guy as good. It's about getting a viable starter where there's not a significant drop off.
Right.
So, and I imagine with the program of that caliber, there would have been no shortage of guys. But
there were several names. Like the one that I harkened back to a lot, because he did wind up transferring and did also, interestingly enough, wind up at LSU, was Hassan Longstreet. And that was somebody who I was very intrigued by and heard a lot of things about, hey, this might be, a mutual interest sort of thing. And obviously it didn't come to fruition. But that was the one name where we know he hit the portal, and I feel comfortable saying that was a guy that I had a very, very close eye on.
The two I had wondered about potentially in that moment would have been one with the UW connection, one with the Jedd Fisch connection. Could you have potentially got Noah Fafita, and could you have gotten Austin Mack?
I was certainly very interested in both of those options. I don't think that either of them were very likely from what I had heard.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, I heard nothing other than the guys we know visited, like you said, probably a lot. I didn't know anything beyond that. But at that QB position, you're one of the fortunate teams this year who there's no doubt who your guy is. I mean, Damon threw for 3,000 yards last year, 25 touchdowns, ran for over 700 more. He is a top 5 quarterback in the Big Ten, maybe a top 10 in the whole country. I mean, there are not many who have proven what he can do. In Damon Williams, maybe for our audience that doesn't know him as well, give us a elevator speech on what makes him a top-notch QB.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to describe it, when you think about his height and all of these other things, is it's the whole plan is what Kyler Murray was, right? Where obviously that's a big expectation, but Jedd Fisch has talked about that. He's talked about making him a Heisman finalist. He's talked about getting him, to Indianapolis for the combine one day and having him be a potential early round draft pick. So like those are the expectations that are internal for Damon. And it's something where, Mike, you talked about it. Yeah, 3,000 yards last year, completed almost 70% of his passes. I think after sacks, it was 600 something yards with 6 touchdowns on the ground. So a true dual threat who is one of the most impressive athletes I have seen in person at the quarterback position. Where
am I right? He's a lefty, right?
No.
Okay. I was getting confused with someone else. Okay. Yeah.
Where it's very impressive to just watch him play the quarterback position because he does process things really well. And he still needs to take that next step forward in terms of not holding on to the ball as long, knowing when he needs to just throw it away and not try to make a play in the backfield. And he winds up taking a sack, or in the case of the Wisconsin game, fumbling the ball inside the 10-yard line. Like those are the sorts of things that he still needs to improve on, but he's going into his second full year as a starter now. And it seems like the expectation is behind a much improved offensive line that he is going to take another step forward. And it's also now doing that against the best defenses in the biggest games.
Yeah. Will Elijah Brown, Stanford transfer, be the backup QB?
That's the expectation right now, where Washington is always going to have that competition, if you will, where they've got a couple of the guys they like in the room, a couple of redshirt freshmen in Tristan Keeney-McMillan and Dash Byerly, and a 4-star recruit and true freshman Derek Zammit, who they're going to give those guys every opportunity to just earn that spot. I don't think that's going to be the case. That's why you bring in an Elijah Brown who has college football experience, unlike the other 3 guys, which seems like why they brought him in.
Absolutely, yeah. The one I found interesting, and you had mentioned the height, and size of Williams, but even those other guys, McMillan, Zammit, none of these guys are exceptionally tall. Right. So it's clearly something that Fisch thinks you can work in his system without that trait being what would be considered the norm or ideal.
Yeah, and that's something that goes back to his time at Arizona as well with Jaden DeLauro, with Noah Fafita, that's sort of the model that he's looked at for so long. That is something where I'm very curious to see what it looks like moving forward, where my quick aside in the 2027 class is Washington's commit is 4-star quarterback Blake Roskopf from down in Arizona. And that kid is the prototypical 6'5", 230-pound rocket arm sort of kid who moves really well and can certainly run some of these, bootleg stuff outside the pocket that Jedd Fisch likes. But I'm curious to see if that's something that changes here in the near future.
Yeah. And it surprised me a little too, because looking at his history, I went back to, like his UCLA time, and you had Josh Rosen that looked every bit the physical part of an NFL guy. So him and Williams, there's a stark contrast between the physical stature of the two of those guys. Yeah. But the running back position, we have a little more uncertainty yet. Of course, Jonah Coleman has gone in the NFL. I liked Adam Muhammad a lot, and then he transferred to Cal. And I, for those of you out there that don't remember, 2 weeks ago I did a Cal episode, so we talked about Muhammad and a guy that hit the portal. But with that running back position, who are we expecting to be the guy, Roman? Will it be Jade Lamar, Trey Cooley? Is it an open competition? Will it be a committee?
I think it's going to be a committee. Where neither Jaden Lamar or Trey Cooley practiced at all in the spring as they were rehabbing from different injuries.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so we didn't see a lot of them. And then another guy who Washington really likes and obviously was productive in limited spurts last fall was Jordan Washington. He suffered a neck injury early on in camp as well, and his status is also up in the air. So The thing
he
is,
was
though,
the depth chart I looked at. He's still red flag, so I didn't know
yeah,
his status.
no, he's
yet.
we're probably not going to learn anything about him until Big Ten Media Days at the very earliest. So that's something that I'm curious to see what happens there. But no matter what, this is going to be a committee approach, and it's something that we saw work well for Jedd Fisch at Arizona. Obviously, it wasn't something he needed as much during his time at Washington because Jonah Coleman was the prospect that we all, saw over the last couple of years. So moving forward, there are a couple of guys in the room outside of Jaden Lamar, who I think is going to be really useful in Spurs, especially as a pass protector. But the guys I've really got my eye on are redshirt freshman Quade Carr, who Jedd Fisch said was the MVP of the position during spring practice. They really, really liked him. Washington made a very concerted effort to go flip him away from San Diego State late in the 2025 process on the recruiting trail. And then they got one of the best running backs in the country from the high school ranks in 2026 in Brian Bonner. And those are two guys that I really like and I think can absolutely play roles this fall. But again, it's something where, if nobody has more than 90, 100 carries on this team by the end of the year, I'm not going to be shocked.
Yeah. And I think Cooley will be a good one. He was, probably out of that group, the one I've been exposed to the most, just now working at Marshall, Sunbelt. He was at Troy last year, started at Georgia Tech, and is a guy who certainly has the skill. But yeah, I didn't know that about Bonner. That's good to know. So I'm like him being a top-notch recruit. And Quade Carr was another one who his measurables, the numbers look good, but I can't say I know much about the guy. So
no, that's fair. He took 3 carries last year and unfortunately sprained his ankle. So the exposure has been limited.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, receiver position. Denzel Boston obviously would have been a big loss for anybody. He's in the NFL now where I expect he'll have a solid career, but 95 targets, 62 catches, almost 900 yards. That's tough to replace for anybody. That's a dude at those numbers. But Desmond Roebuck and Rasheed Williams are also very good players, and Christian Moss was a good player at Kennesaw State. So you certainly have guys who look the part and have been productive that should be the next man up in that offense. So
absolutely.
What can you tell us about the receiver position?
Oh, there's so much to tell where Rasheed Williams was somebody who this coaching staff fully expected to break out last year, but unfortunately suffered several injuries that just, hampered that progress where he broke his collarbone, I believe it was in week 2. And then while rehabbing from the collarbone leading up to, I believe it was either the Illinois or the Wisconsin game, he got as he told us during spring practice, he got his hand stuck inside somebody's helmet and broke something. So just real bad luck over the course of the year. And that's one of those things where I think that he's going to step up and have a big year. I'm certainly very intrigued with Christian Moss, who missed the majority of spring practice with a hamstring injury. And it's one of those things where whenever you talk about Jedd Fisch, you need to talk about freshmen and young players because he wants to find a way to get these guys on the field. And Chris Lawson is somebody who's listed as a sophomore, but was somebody who would have played in every single game as a true freshman if he wasn't limited by injuries in fall camp last year. He was very, very impressive in the spring of 2025. And so that's a guy I got my eye on. And then there were a pair of 4-star recruits that also just really, really impressed me during spring practice. One of them was Jordan Clay, who's going to be competing with Christian Moss at that X spot. That's a dude who's just big, strong, really athletic, can go up and get the football. And then the other one is Trez Davis, a 4-star recruit out of Louisiana that Washington grabbed late in the process after he decommitted from Tulane. And so I look at both of those guys, and Trez is more somebody who can play that slot role if need be, but can also thrive out in the Z spot behind Rasheed Williams, where another field stretching, really nice athlete that Washington's coaching staff talked about being the most advanced of the 3 4-star recruits they brought in at wide receiver in this last class. And you could certainly see that in terms of how he's able to separate from defensive backs, his ability as a route runner, all those sorts of things. So this receiver group is very, very talented. There's a lot there. Unfortunately, we just haven't seen a lot of that on the field just yet. Yeah.
And 2 guys who were on the roster last year that didn't get a ton of targets just because of Boston and Roebuck, but that I had followed since the recruiting process. Chris Lawson and Justice Williams, both, they're the 2 who I had, had some exposure to. And I think both looked, over 6 feet tall. In Williams's case, very tall. And then Lawson's, not small by any means, but replacing Boston was tough, but it looks like that room is very solid.
It's very solid.
So,
I don't know if we're going to see anybody emerge as that, 1A sort of replacement of Denzel Boston outside of potentially Desmond Roebuck, who could get peppered with targets over the middle. I'm glad you mentioned Justice Williams, because that's somebody who I've been very, very high on since he committed to Kalen DeBoer's staff, which feels like it was about 18 years ago at this point in time. But he's someone who's just struggled with injuries, where he had to redshirt in 2024 due to an injury, I believe, that he suffered at the high school level. And then in 2025, he was kind of in and out of the rotation with the same thing. And so this is going to be a very big fall for Justice in terms of it. There's still going to be an open competition, and Washington is going to give him every opportunity to step up and make a play and earn a spot in the rotation.
Okay. No, that's all good to know about that position group. The tight end group, DeGraff comes back, 32 catches last year, 2 touchdowns. The rest of the group, it doesn't appear as like they have much experience playing, but what can you tell us about the tight end group other than DeGraff?
Yeah, Decker DeGraff is a really fun player who I think is going to move all over the offense a little bit this year. Cade Eldridge is a name to keep an eye on, where he played a lot of fullback for Washington last year, so the stats might not be there.
That makes
but
sense.
He played in 7 games and then suffered a foot injury at Michigan that ended his season. There are 2 guys, actually, that I would keep a very close eye on in this room. One is Baron Naone, a sophomore, former 4-star recruit out of Oregon, where this is a guy that this coaching staff really, really likes. And I think we would have seen a little bit more of him last fall, especially as a blocker. But with Quentin Moore in the room, somebody who Jedd Fisch called the best blocking tight end he's been around at the college level, there wasn't necessarily a lot of room for him to get snaps. And then he's also a really nice athlete. I think that Washington is going to try to incorporate him into the passing game as well. And then the other guy is a true freshman in Kakua Amua, who the Huskies flipped away from Florida in the 2026 cycle. And that's just another dude where you talk about just big physical blockers. Washington's coaching staff, since the day he signed, has been saying that's a guy who we believe can step into that role as a true Y inline tight end sort of just blocking role. And I really like what we saw from
certainly Fisch uses those guys in his offense too. Like he has utility. He has utility for all different kinds of tight ends.
Yeah, he loves running that heavy 12, 13 personnel sort of looks. And I believe that Kakua Mua is somebody who, the stats might not be there at the end of the year, but if he's someone who stepped up and played a significant role as a blocker in this offense, it's not going to shock me.
Okay. No, that's good to know. And, last group on the offensive side of the ball, get to, the O-line up front. There aren't many teams I've talked to this offseason who have 3 returning starter O-linemen like you guys do. It seems like it's a position group where everybody's replacing 3, 4, 5 guys. But you guys are, fortunate enough that John Mills, Landon Hatchett on the inside are both coming back at guard and center. And then as a party at right tackle coming back. And then a few months back, I had a Sam Houston guest, and they were, upset that Colt Dietrich left. He was their best O-lineman and the guy who couldn't, I don't know if he will be the left tackle, but it wouldn't shock me if he is, because he's pretty good. So what about the O-line?
This offensive line group is really interesting. And actually, Mike, there are going to be 4 starters coming back in Garrett Hatchett as well at right guard, where I don't know if he's going to win that job, to be completely honest with you.
Okay. And most of the guests I've had, there's been 1 or 2 guys on my depth chart who it says they graduated, but they got another year. He's the guy on your guys' squad that I thought he was done, but he's back.
Yeah, he got a 7th year. So we could see him at right guard. We could see redshirt freshman Champ Talialia, a big physical guy who played about 100 snaps last year, and a bunch of them came in Big Ten play against Purdue, against UCLA, and I really like the way that he looked in those games. So he's somebody that I believe can absolutely win that starting job. Colt Dietrich, unfortunately, didn't practice in the spring as he was recovering from an injury. Even if he was fully healthy, I don't know if he was going to be Washington's starter at left tackle. The whole point was to bring him in as a potential depth option. If he wins that job, that's great. But Washington is over the moon thrilled about freshman Cody Green, who took every rep with the starters during spring practice. And this is a former 5-star recruit who he just looked the part where it was one of the things that the highest compliment I can give him after watching every single spring practice was you didn't notice him. There, if you're coming out to a Washington practice or a game for the first time and you just see number 76 lining up at left tackle, you'd say, oh, that redshirt sophomore, that junior, yeah, he looks really good. Oh, wait, no, that's an 18-year-old true freshman. He's extremely impressive physically, athletically, mentally. He understands what Washington's offense wants to do really, really well. And this coaching staff has praised him as such since the moment he arrived on campus.
I would be surprised if he's not an NFL player someday. I mean, he's 6'6", 320 pounds, good frame, long arms, looks the part. There's a reason he was an elite recruit. And
yes.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know he was that ahead of schedule though. So
he was extremely impressive throughout spring ball.
Okay. No, that's very helpful to know. The other one you had mentioned who I haven't seen play, or at least I don't recall it, but certainly looks the part and is a massive guy, was Talialia at guard. Yeah. I was thinking he was going to be that right guard, but with Hatchett back, he'll likely have to wait another year. But
it's going to be a battle. I don't expect him to ride the bench this year by any stretch of the imagination, where he took all the reps with the first team at right guard during spring ball because Landon Hatchett's still recovering from an injury. So Guerin was playing center. And then Guerin got hurt a couple practices in as well.
Okay.
So it was something where Champ still has a whole bunch of reps with the starters under his belt. And in terms of the expectation for him since he got here, it didn't feel like he was going to be sitting around very long, much in just what was going on with John Mills. But the difference between him and Mills was a little bit more advanced in terms of pass protection. Yeah. And that's what allowed him to win that starting job as a true freshman outside of the immense physicality that we saw throughout the year. Yeah. So Champ just took a little bit longer in that regard to progress. And I think that Washington is very comfortable where he is now.
And I always tell people this with O-line, like PFF grades are not the end all be all. It's not a perfect metric. However, for O-linemen, we don't have many quantitative metrics to go by. And John Mills's pass grade is elite.
Yeah.
So it's like I looked up like, whoa, you don't see many guards with a grade that high at pass blocking. And his run grade, certainly not as good, not elite, but it's still pretty good. Like it's not bad by any means.
For a kid who played half the season at 17 years old and also had to deal with a high ankle sprain that he came back from after 2 or 3 weeks and still looked like one of the best offensive linemen in the Big Ten. He was so impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think this is a position where if Washington is going to win 9, 10 or more games this year, it's going to largely be led by this group and Williams. Yes. And this group it's a group that to win that many games, they don't have to outperform a ton. They just have to do what we think they can do because they look very good.
Absolutely. And this is something where internally the expectation is this is a top 3, top 5 unit in the Big Ten. And John Mills came out and said it in February that internally the team believes that they can win the Joe Moore Award. And that's the goal. That's what they're working for. And so maybe that's a 2027 thing. We'll see with, just some more experience at a couple different spots. Yeah. But I really like this unit. I think that it's going to surprise the people from a national perspective who might not be looking at it very close.
Conference and you mentioned in the conference in the Joe Moore level, Iowa and Indiana will be ever present in that top 3, probably at O-line. But after that, you have Washington will be competing with Ohio State and Oregon for that third, that top 3 O-line in the conference are going to be up there.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Now let's shift to the defensive side of the ball, which we talked about how impressive they were before, but in Ryan Walters, they're a team who, and he's been this way as a coordinator before. You get multiple looks. They're going to show all kinds of different. They're going to play a lot of linemen, a lot of linebackers, a lot of D-backs. It's not like they're always a 4-2-5. They're always a 3-4. They're always a 4-3. You're going to see a lot of different looks and guys moving around and athletic guys doing multiple things.
That's one of the really fun things that we got to see a little bit of last fall, and we're going to see way more of at every single position.
Awesome. No, that's good to know. But going through the positions with D-line, Elenius Davis and Ontario Thompson both returned, guys who played in.
Ontario Thompson's not back. He got drafted.
I did not know that. That was another one that was a misprint on the depth chart, so that's on me. But Davis is back, and Devin Hyde was another guy I saw played in a good chunk of the games as a true freshman last year. And then the two that popped for me portal-wise, Darren Cooley from Ball State and Deshaun Watts from Sac State, both guys who played a lot of games last year and had a good amount of tackles. What can you tell us about the D-line?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Darren Conley and Deshaun Watts, because those are two guys where there are going to be questions because they're coming from lower levels. But Deshaun Watts in particular was the highest graded run defender per PFF, regardless of school last year, or in terms of FBS, FCS. He's someone who I also really like as a pass rusher, where he's got a very interesting build at like 6'1", 330 plus pounds. Like he's very just wide and stocky, but very explosive for his size. And I think he might be able to give you a little bit of something as a pass rusher. Washington expects Darren Conley to come in and be someone who, when Ryan Walters does like going to those 5-man fronts that he shows, to be a consistent disruptor and win those one-on-one matchups and get after the quarterback, which he certainly did during his time at Ball State. And so I really like what those guys bring to the table. The Huskies certainly believe that Elenius Davis is going to step into star category in terms of on the interior.
He's a guy I have seen him play since he was in about 8th grade, because he's a Moorhead.
Yeah, he's a Minnesota kid. That's right.
They're in the same. So before going to South Carolina, I coached at a high school, and we were in the same district as his high school. So I've seen him since he was. Yeah, I believe for the upcoming 27 recruiting class, I think they have 4 guys committed to the University of Minnesota. So,
very cool.
Good high school program. But yeah, so he's a guy and you always knew, like, okay, this kid looks to play. He's going to be good. Like you could tell he was just special from a young age.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things where it took some patience in terms of development, pass rush moves, and different things like that. But they certainly expect that step from him this coming season. And on top of that, another guy who Washington brought in out of the transfer portal, on the interior at least, is Kai McClendon from Mississippi State, who didn't play last year because he had a torn ACL and didn't practice at all in the spring either as he continues to rehab. But they really like what he brings to the table as a run stuffer as well. And combining that with some really high-end talent from the high school ranks in Derek Coleman-Brusa and Tiayu Mukais, who are both going to take some snaps along the interior as well. There's a lot to like about what Washington's defensive tackle unit specifically is going to be, where along the defensive line as a whole, UW lost 10 bodies last year, whether it be to the transfer portal, the NFL draft, where 2 guys got taken, or just graduation. And it's weird to say this, and I've said this several times now, but this group is deeper. I think there's more depth, more talent. And for a unit that had only 24 sacks last year, the expectation is now that they need to take that next step forward and generate more havoc in the backfield and turn more of the pressures that they did get into sacks. And I think that with the amount of depth that they've been able to add up front, that they can do just that.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that with McClendon. That was one of the questions I had. I always am curious when you get a transfer from another P4 school who had 0 stats last year. He was hurt. That is putting the all the links together. So that does make sense. Okay. Perfect. Linebacker wise, I mean, returning Al Ukta and Alexander, both good players. Was Al Ukta hurt for a good chunk of last year?
Yeah, he tore his ACL in week 3 against Washington State.
Okay. So that his former school, I believe.
Yes.
So, and then Alexander, I know, started at UCF, played the whole season last year. I assume he was probably either first or second on the team in tackles, though I don't have that number in front of me. But it seemed like him and Bryant were both pretty solid last year. Of course, Bryant, lost him to USC. And then Jacob Lane was the other guy I saw on the outside who, kind of that edge, he's that tweener, 6'5", 255 type guy that's an outside backer, end type But
so I think we should break this into two groups because Washington has the inside linebackers, and a couple of them, as like X-Ray Alexander, will play some outside as well, but they just designate all their edge rushers as outside linebackers at this point in time as well. So you mentioned Jacob Lane. He's going to be in a very interesting group with Ohio State transfer Logan George, who was injured for the majority of his time there and was somebody that Washington really, really liked out of the transfer portal when he did choose the Buckeyes. So it's kind of a, oh, cool, getting him back in the area kind of deal after he was really productive at Idaho State is very important. And then you mentioned Devin Hyde. Devin Hyde's going to be in that edge rusher outside linebacker room as well. This coaching staff loves Devin Hyde. That's somebody where, especially if you ask anybody in terms of his teammates, like, hey, who's the guy that you think is going to step up and break out? Devin Hyde was one of the consensus answers from several different guys that were at the NFL Combine and everything like that. So it's fun to hear that. But then on top of it, Washington is also hoping that a pair of former Arizona transfers in Isaiah Ward and Russell Davis can continue to produce, where Isaiah Ward was productive over his first couple of years, but was limited by injuries a little bit last season. Russell Davis has been very much limited by injuries. So they really like those guys as well. And then we're also expecting to see two true freshmen in this rotation of outside linebacker in JD Hill, who was a borderline top 100 recruit last year out of Mission Viejo High School, where he had 40 plus sacks at the high school level. And I've had members of Washington's player personnel department comp him to Melvin Ingram in terms of his build as a pass rusher, where he's like 6'1", 280. So very unique in that regard for somebody who's going to play on the edge. Yeah. And then another guy who I originally thought was going to be in the hybrid, like inside outside linebacker sort of mold, in another 4-star recruit in Ramzak Fruin from Bethel High School here in Washington. And he was probably my favorite player that I watched on film in last year's high school class for UW. This kid at 6'4", he's listed at 235 right now, is long, explosive, got a really quick first step, and generated a whole lot of pressure throughout spring practice, where if he's somebody that Washington likes to use a lot as a speed rusher, just in terms of third and longs and different things like that, that's not going to shock me because of the edge and the physicality that he plays with at that size and with that sort of athleticism.
Okay. No, that's all very good to know. Because that was one of those position groups where beyond the top couple, I didn't really have good insights or info into any of them. So looking at the D-backs now, I know.
Here, hold on. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off with the inside linebackers too, because there are a couple other names.
Oh, yes, please go for it. Yes.
Yeah, where you mentioned X-Ray Alexander, who was so impressive down the stretch last year. I really liked what he brought to the table. Big, physical, can set the edge against the run as an outside linebacker. Washington loves him on the inside. Buda El-Ukta, we'll see what that looks like. Okay. He's obviously recovering from the ACL, so it's also something where Washington doesn't necessarily feel the need to push him, because you also have two guys that recovered from ACL tears last year in Jacob Manu and Zedrius Rainey-Saleh. So the expectation is that this is going to be one of the best linebacker units in the country on the inside, where X-Ray was tremendous last season. I couldn't have been more impressed with him. And Jacob Manu, we know what that production looks like when he's healthy from his time at Arizona. And Washington did decide to, manipulate which games he played in last year a little bit so he could come back for the 2026 season, where they limited him to 4 games plus the bowl so he could just use the red shirt that he didn't in 2022. And then Zedrius, another guy where he is going to be a major piece of this defense at 6'3", 225, 230, whatever he's listed at right now, but just so incredibly athletic, and played inside linebacker, played outside linebacker last year, rushed the passer for you a little bit, and is someone that Ryan Walters loves to deploy 2 linebackers, but when they go to 3, they're probably going to take off a corner and just let Zedrius Rainey-Saleh play in the nickel role, because they love him as an athlete that much. You can go back and look at the Illinois game. It was last year where Sicario Davis had a pick on 3rd and 18, where it's Zedrius Rainey-Saleh in coverage on Hank Beatty out in the slot. Like, that's how much that Washington trusted him as a 17-year-old true freshman in that role. And so looking to the future, this is a guy that if he was fully healthy last year, he would have been a freshman All-American. And now looking at what kind of role he can play in the defense this year, even if he doesn't start and is just a heavy part of that rotation, he's going to be an impact player.
That's good to know. Yeah, I'm really glad you told me all that, because especially with Rainey Solly, I did not know that he was, that impressive. So good to know. Yeah, I appreciate that. Now, shall we move on to the defensive backs?
Oh, let's do it. I love talking about the secondary.
Awesome. So one of the guys who, another episode I did maybe 2-ish months ago, was Virginia. So Emmanuel Carnley, of course,
Yes.
corner from there who transferred. And he certainly fits that profile of the tall range, 6'3", 185. He fits the model of what we have seen in Ryan Walters cornerbacks. He's that Prysock, Tacario Davis mold of, lanky guys. So the other corner, who do you think, will it be Dylan Robinson? He was a guy that I looked at. Okay. So yeah, you're going to have 2 6'3" guys out there again.
Yeah, Dylan Robinson is a lot of fun to watch, where this is someone that didn't arrive until last June and had been training on both sides of the ball throughout his high school career. And so really just started learning the cornerback position full time about a year ago. And then he got trotted out there for his first start against Jeremiah Smith. That's just, and that's the level of confidence that Washington has in him, because Tacario Davis was hurt, and that they just said, okay, yeah, we're just throwing this true freshman out there. Because you listen to any member of this coaching staff talk about him, and they'll just tell you that kid's got first round traits in terms of athleticism. And you saw it show up at different points last year in coverage, where he had a sack on Dante Moore in the Oregon game, where Ryan Walters brought him on a perfectly timed corner blitz. Like, there are so many different things that you can like about Dylan Robinson. And then we talked to him in the spring, and he goes, yeah, no, now I've learned so much more about the mental side of the game from playing in every game last year and needing to start as often as he did as Tacario dealt with injuries. This is someone where he certainly got beat, as any true freshman will, at several different points last year, especially in the Oregon game. They tried picking on him a little bit. But looking at what kind of jump I expect from him from year 1 to year 2, this is somebody who I believe can be an all-conference caliber player.
Awesome. No, that's high praise. So that's good to know. And yeah, I had mentioned Carnley. He was very solid, at UVA last year, a guy who played in all 14 of their games, had multiple pass breakups, interception, started his career at Arizona. So there is that Fisch connection with him. But yeah, it was at UVA last year. Then safety, you guys return your best one.
Yep.
So, in Alex McLaughlin. So good player there. What about the rest of that position? Who are some of the other guys we might see? The only name who would, kind of pop with me was Ryan Dillard Allen. But I can't say I know much about the other safeties on that roster.
Yeah, Ryland Dillard Allen is going to be the other starter. He was a freshman All-American last year. I believe PFF gave him that. But that's another guy that this coaching staff loves. Really physical. Go back and watch. For anybody who wants to know anything about Ryland, go watch the Oregon game from last year, where he led all tacklers with 11 in that game, all solos. Ooh. He is a very, very impressive player, where in high school, he was laser timed at a 4.28 40-yard dash. So he's got that high-end speed and range that Ryan Walters wants in that post-safety role, to be able to, roam all over the field and help in coverage, as well as the willingness to come downhill and tackle. The two guys who I'd really point out behind him are Paul Menke, a former 4-star recruit who's been around since the DeBoer days and is going to have an opportunity to work his way into the rotation this fall. And the other is Gavin Day, another top 100 recruit that the Huskies signed in the 26 class, who 6'3", 205, I want to say is what he's listed at now. Long, rangy, as physical as they come. His high school film, in terms of just the physicality and the big hits that he lays on people, is so much fun to watch. So I look at that I almost said tandem when there's 4 guys there. Yeah. That grouping right there of safeties is what we're going to see. It's going to be a lot of Ryland and a lot of Alex. And then the other two are going to rotate in when opposing offenses go to 12 personnel. That has been Washington's counter, or it was in 2025, and why we saw so much of Ryland last year. I'm curious to see if that's a little bit different this year because of the Zajus Rainey Saleh thing that I talked about a couple of minutes ago. But previously, that had been Ryan Walters' counter to 12 personnel, was 3 safeties. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on. That's
good to know. Yeah, I appreciate all that. One recruit who at least has impressive numbers and was Duncan at
Rajon
corner.
Duncan, yes.
Yep. So he and in their certain willingness to play young guys, could he see the field early on?
My projection right now for the depth charts I've done and everything like that is that he'll be cornerback 3.
Okay.
Dylan Robinson
That's
was
impressive.
last year. Yeah. And I believe it'll be the same thing where Washington just loves what he brings to the table in terms of the same thing, the athleticism, the physicality. And in terms of comparing him to Dylan Robinson, he's just a little bit further ahead in terms of the technique at corner and different things like that we've just seen from him on film. So he's one of those guys that, yeah, I absolutely expect him to, at the very least, be in the rotation. And if that's the role that Washington wants for him, yeah, that's certainly what I expect.
Good to know. That's awesome. Special team wise, I know both kicker and punter return, which is another one. I haven't seen many teams that have.
No, they're both going to be new.
What? Oh, I thought Grady Gross was back.
No, Grady Gross just went 4 for 4 and is out the door.
Okay, that is.
So
I'm definitely getting an outdated depth chart. Then I apologize for that, everybody out there. So kicker wise, I did notice one portal. Tyler Robles from Texas State. Will he be the kicker?
He will be. Yes.
Okay, I'd seen him. They came to Huntington last year to play Marshall, so I did see him play live. And then punting wise, Hunter Green was one I saw portaled in from San Diego State, a extremely tall human. So, and
he hits bombs to quote him, where he was 6th in the FBS last year, averaged 0.97 yards per punt.
And they were outstanding on special teams last year at San Diego State. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So there are very high expectations around Hunter Green.
Okay. I saw that he was a Kirkland, so a Seattle area guy.
Yeah, his dad's a legacy. His dad played on the team as well.
Awesome. Very good to know. Okay. So let's get into this year, where we got about, 10 or so minutes left. What are your expectations going into this year?
My expectation right now is that this needs to be at least a 9-win team. Where I look at the way the schedule shapes up, yeah, there are some tough, outside of the top tier of games of at USC, at Oregon, and at home against Indiana. I look at playing Iowa, Penn State, Nebraska being that next tier down. However, the only one of those 3 games that's on the road is Nebraska.
I saw that.
And so I really like the way the schedule shapes up for Washington in that way. And yeah, you got some, still tough Big Ten road trips you have to take later in the year, Purdue, Michigan State. But I think that with the way that Jedd Fisch has continued to talk about getting better year after year and where he has, gone out and said, okay, this is where we want to put the young talent. This is where we're going to trust veterans or where we're going to trust the transfer portal. The biggest questions that I have seen from Husky fans outside of the whole DeMond Williams thing is very clear. Who's going to replace Jonah Coleman? Who's going to replace Denzel Boston? And while there isn't necessarily a clear answer right now, I believe that Washington has more than enough talent at both spots to do that. And so I look at how that's going to come into 2026 and it's okay. Yeah, that might be a little tough. Not necessarily early on in the year, but when you go to USC, what's that going to look like? When you have to take some of those road trips, who is going to step up in those moments and make plays? And where I lean on the fact that this defense is going to be one of the nation's best. It traveled very well last year. It's probably going to do the same thing again this year. So I think if you're able to do that and get enough from DeMond Williams, who's taking a step forward, this offensive line, like you mentioned, that the expectation should be no fewer than 9 wins, in my opinion.
I agree. This is one of the few teams, and this, what I'm about to say is a little skewed, that I've had a lot of G6 teams this summer, but even relative to the P4 ones, I keep, I'm diving into the roster and looking, I'm like, whoa, that's better than I thought. This is impressive. They're coming off of a good season and they look improved in a lot of areas. And it's one of the few I've had in the last 2 months where I'm like, there legitimately is a chance this team could go to the playoffs this year. I think they're, like you said, I think 9 wins is the expectation. And with some luck, you're looking at 10. And if you win 10 games in the SEC or Big Ten, you will be a playoff team.
Yep.
So that, you'll have to handle your business in the 9 games you're expected to win. And then you'll have to knock off USC, Indiana, or Oregon. And getting one of them is doable.
Yep. So, I look at the USC one especially as it in that regard.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, could be. I think the other one, that last game, Oregon at home, or Oregon on the road, excuse me, that's going to be a battle the last game of the year, because there's a good chance you're looking at this game in the final week of the year, and a trip to the Big Ten title game the next weekend and a trip to the playoffs is both on the line. And it could be a super high stakes game. That could be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. I agree. And that was what the hope was the 2025 game was going to be. Yes. And I think that if Washington just wins that game at Wisconsin, we're looking at that game in that light, just from a much bigger perspective in that way.
Yeah.
Because that's how we would have been looking at the 2025 game as well, where, Washington wins, they knock off Oregon. Then all of a sudden, hey, look, there's a spot in the playoff for them if they can, just go out there and take it.
Yeah. And we haven't mentioned this as much. We'll get into these in a minute, but there also is a chance where we're looking at that as a Damon Williams, Dante Moore Heisman Trophy on this on the line game. That could, and even similar the week before with Josh Hoover, because that could happen. I mean, there's all these guys could be in that mix. We're dealing with that level of QB on teams that will win enough games, because that, like it or not, winning a certain number of games is almost a prerequisite for the winning that now. And that's okay. I have no problem with that. But I agree. I think there is a chance they're a 10-win team. I expect at least 9. And they could be, for me, I look at Ohio State, Oregon probably will be playoff teams. They would be disappointed if they're not. But after them, you have Indiana, USC, Washington, all in that mix of, there's a good chance 2 of those 3 could also be playoff teams. So it's going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to the Big Ten schedule. While we're talking about those guys and QBs, this is one of them. Reed did this list. He's a guy who I'm going to have on as a guest pretty soon. But just looking at, the ranking the QBs, with the top 5, I don't debate the top 5. I think those 5 are clearly the top 5.
I would agree.
I would have Williams higher on the list, and I'm not just saying that to pat you on the back. I would have him ahead of Hoover. I don't hate if somebody would have Maeva. No, I'm very high on Jade Maeva. I think his skill set is good. Julian Saint certainly was a stud last year. He also has a phenomenal supporting cast.
Yep.
So, but if you were putting on your QB glasses, how do you think the top 5 would look to you?
I think I would just flip Josh Hoover and Damon Williams personally. I think one of the biggest things is Damon Williams finished 2nd in the Big Ten in total yards last year, only behind Jaden Maeva. So I think that's kind of where you can kind of look at that and just say, all right, I think this is fair to leave those 2. Honestly, the biggest thing for me when I look at this list, I think Malik Washington is heavily underrated. Yeah. That's someone where Washington had to go out to Maryland last year and pulled off that wild 20-point comeback in the 4th quarter.
I've told a few people, maybe the most surprising QB thing in the portal last year for me was that they were able to hold on to Malik Washington.
Yeah, no, I agree.
An elite program didn't come and snipe him.
I agree. Obviously, if things go the way that I feel like we all expect them to at Maryland this fall, that'll probably happen. But I think that he is someone where I would push him up to number 7, to be honest with you. I'd probably flip him and Anthony Calandria. I'm not totally sold on him, but it's something where
Colton Joseph's a guy. I'm like, he was good at ODU last year, and I think he's a very good fit for that offense. The other guy I'm higher on than most, and especially in SEC land and Tennessee fans, you're an idiot, he sucked. I'm pretty high on Nico this year. I think he's going to be pretty good in the Chesney offense this year. Now,
I think the Chesney offense will help.
The schedule's tough.
The schedule's tough. That's just one of those things where, especially after like watching him in person last year when they played Washington, obviously a very different situation. It's one of those things where, yeah, the talent's been there. It's always been there. But I just want to do the whole seeing is believing thing with him, because like with a guy like Bryce Underwood, I wouldn't hate if people put him a little bit higher than 12 here, but it's one of those things where at least, we're talking about him as a sophomore versus Nico, who's playing his 4th year of college football.
Yeah. Who, as a redshirt freshman, did lead a team to the playoffs. I'll give him that.
Absolutely.
Now, that team had the best front 7 in the country on defense, and nobody could run on him. So he had that.
That helped.
Yeah. And I will say the bottom 4, Lonergan, Milivojevic, Brown, Heklinski, tough to argue with that. I don't.
Oh yeah, no arguments here.
Yeah. Now, Lonergan has a stud receiver to throw to and a stud receiver to hand off to. They don't have much else on offense. But I wouldn't also hate it. Drake Lindsay was better than I expected last year. Now, I don't know how much you could pump him up this list, but I will say he was better than I thought he would be last year.
I agree. And that's, I mean, to bring it back to Washington, that's a matchup I'm really looking forward to, to see what that's going to look like to open Big Ten play against Ryan Walters defense here in Husky Stadium in late September.
I didn't know it was the Big Ten opener. That's cool.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's something I'm very curious about because, talking to some NFL scout friends of mine, like Drake Lindsay is certainly getting some buzz in a couple of those circles because of the arm talent, because of a lot of those things, but I just want to see more. I'm never sold on Minnesota.
Okay. It's one of those, we're not sold on them as an elite team ever, but they're extremely predictable and consistent. I said that on the group show last week. They will almost certainly win 8 games. Probably won't win any more. Probably won't win any less. That's what they're going to do. And then they will win their bowl game because Fleck wins every game where they have more than a week to prepare. They're really good at that. So, and then Aiden Childs is a guy. Every year I'm on I'm like, oh, this guy's going to be good. Then he followed Jonathan Smith to Michigan. So I'm like, oh, he's going to be good. Wasn't good. Now he follows to, he transfers to Northwestern, and I'm like, oh, he's going to be good. I don't know. I'm always stumped for Aiden Childs, even though he's never really shown it to me the last couple of years.
Mike, let me introduce you to a little bit of Washington lore here.
Okay.
Aiden Childs, one-time top target for Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb in the 2024 recruiting class. He's someone who the Huskies had been on for a very, very long time and wound up obviously at Oregon State there for a minute. That was somebody who there was a good point in time where I was convinced that he was going to be leading the Husky offense at some point moving forward.
No, if there are 2 men I trust to rehab a quarterback, it might be Chip Kelly and Jerry Neuheisel. He will be well coached at Northwestern. I will give him that. But it's also one of those, after being snake bitten a couple of years, I'm like, I got to see it from him before I'm proven. And Caton Hauser's we're going middle of the list now, but he struggled at Big Ten schools before. At ECU, he did well, but he also had the best G6 receiving core in the country last year. An O coordinator that's now at Ole Miss, a tight end that's now at Vandy, and a good running game. Like, he had a really good supporting cast, and he threw some bad interceptions on deep balls. So Caton Hauser, we'll see what happens with him this year. But that Illinois team is in a pretty solid foundational place. So, yeah. Any other parting words you want to say about Big Ten QBs?
I think that's all I got for you.
Okay. We will do our final. I always ask these 2 questions. The first one, I think I know the answer in the Big Ten. Which coach in the Big Ten is on the hottest seat?
Oh, it's Mike Loxley.
It has to be. It has to be. Yes. I did a coach's hot seat for the whole country a while back, and he was the highest P4. He was second after Mike Norvell, and I put a Rand on there too. But yeah, Loxley certainly the hottest Big Ten one, number 5 overall. I am shocked that he still has a job to some extent. I mean, you look at his.
It's the recruiting, it's the fact that he went out there and produced the high end edge rushers that he did last year. Brings in Zion Ely, obviously hangs on to Malik Washington. I think that's the biggest reason.
Do you want to take a stab at what Mike Loxley's career record as a head coach is?
I'll take a stab at the winning percentage.
Okay.
And I'm going to go with 380.
That's probably about in the vicinity. He is 39 and 75 as a head coach.
I really didn't want to guess, mainly because I can't remember how many games he's coached at this point in time, and it scared me. I love this math live on air. We are killing it with this.
34. You were close. 34. Yeah, very close. Yeah. So, but now, obviously skewed by his 3 years as a New Mexico head coach, 2-26.
Oof.
So, yeah. But he's been 37 and 49 at Maryland. And he had the 2 good winning records with Talia, Tagovailoa at QB, and they've not done much other than that. Fun fact: the Big Ten career passing leader, Talia Tagovailoa.
That is true. Yeah.
Yes, but it has to be Loxley. He's the hottest seat, and I don't think it's particularly close. There's nobody, I don't think, who is even remotely on as hot of a seat as he is.
I would agree. I would say that Luke Fickell is probably second, but there's still a gap.
Yeah. Now, the next question I always ask, and then there's another question I'm going to ask you after that as a first time, but
let's do it.
Which coach in the Big Ten with a good season or two gets a blue blood job? Which coach is that guy who could get an elite job?
Oh, that's a good question. I know they're paying him a lot, but it's Bob Chesney, in my opinion.
Okay.
I think that he is someone where, with the way he's recruiting at UCLA, yes, they have the funds. Yes, they have all those sorts of things, but I just don't know if that's going to be a long-term destination.
Everything about him is he's not a West Coast guy. Everything about him is back. You feel like he has 2 good years and it's a stepping stone like JMU was.
Yeah, that was my thought. Like there was a moment where, with the way Penn State's coaching search was going, that I thought that they might have wound up with him, to be honest.
Okay.
That's one of those things where if he winds up in a job like that, that's not going to shock me.
I think that's the other one I would hypothesize here. This guy may have already done it if it was going to happen. If Georgia or Alabama open, just Dan Lanning take that jump. Being a
I think Georgia. I think that if Georgia opens, he would take it. And I remember there was a lot going around about him being the target at Alabama before it was Kalen DeBoer. And the more you dive into that, and especially with some of the things that I heard, it was always Kalen DeBoer. He was always that target.
And maybe Lanning had enough sense to be, I don't want to be the guy that follows the legend. You want to follow the guy that follows the legend.
Right. And then because even in the case of, if he does bolt for Georgia, it's, oh, well, hey, he coached for Kirby Smart for long enough that I don't think it's the same sort of, aura of all that. And obviously with Nick Saban, that doesn't come close either way. Yeah.
No, but the Chesney one makes a lot of sense. The other one, a lot of people say, well, will an elite program or a blue blood want to hire Cignetti? I don't know if you leave if you're him at this point. Why would you?
I honestly didn't even think about him, because he's already signed 3 contract extensions in 2 years there. He's not. I don't think he's going anywhere.
I also wouldn't hate if somebody said Jedd Fisch for this question. He's a good coach.
So I think you bring up a fair point. However, in my opinion, from growing up in the era of Washington that I did, people might not realize it, but Washington belongs in that blue blood category in terms of what that program has been in the 80s and 90s, when it was traditionally one of the best in college football. And then you go back and you look, especially over the last 10 years, Washington has had 5 10-win seasons, had 3 straight trips to New Year's Six Bowls. And it's something where, you look at 2022 and 2023 as well, where some people might look at that and say, oh, wow, what's going on at Washington? That's been a thing.
They've always been.
And I
would say I also think, like I said with Lanning, if Fisch was going to do that, it would have been to Florida this offseason.
Yeah, I don't know if there was as much interest there on the Florida side.
There might not have been. Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, where like Florida would have always been that job. I think that Michigan would have been a landing spot for him as well. But I think that it was the same kind of thing where I don't know if it's necessarily fair to him. I'm not complaining personally, but I think that his overall record is something that turns off some of those programs in terms of,
and I don't think people realize how god awful the Arizona team was that he took over.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a big part of this as well. Where that's where I say, like, I don't think that's fair to him in terms of, this is a guy that's a program builder, but his record is what? Like, I think that's a little ridiculous.
He took a 1-11 team to 10 wins in his third year.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how bad they were. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons, like, where I think that in terms of not just what the expectation is this year for Washington, but a long-term fit between Fisch and UW does make sense, where it's one of those things of he understands what needs to happen at Washington to bring it back to that, true blue blood status that it has had in the past. And so where I look at how things are continuing to build for UW in the Big Ten, I think that is a very coveted job. And from everything that I've been told and heard, like Jedd Fisch knows that.
Okay, that's good. Now, the question I've kind of wanted to pilot thought about, and it's going to become a new end segment one.
Oh, let's do it.
And I'm going to, with you, it's Fisch, obviously, but if Jedd Fisch leaves today, which coach would you want Washington to hire tomorrow to replace him?
Ooh, that's really fun. So I'll give you two schools of thought here.
Okay.
One of them is Jason Eck at New Mexico.
Love it.
I think that'd be really fun, where he was awesome at Idaho, obviously has some roots in the Pacific Northwest because of that. The other one that, like, I've just heard this name too many times and I've just kind of accepted, or actually, no, I'm going to give you three. The second one is Ryan Grubb, where people hope that would happen.
He was one of the two that I thought of. I'll tell you the other one after you're done.
Yeah, we might be thinking in the same boat here, where Ryan Grubb was somebody where I didn't want that to happen when Kalen DeBoer left, because he didn't have that experience. And it was just something where I want to see what that looks like at a lower level first, which brings me to option number 3, Jamarcus Shepard at Oregon State, where Jamarcus Shepard is somebody that I could go on for another entire podcast about how wonderful of a human being Jamarcus Shepard is, and how much every single person in and around the program and in the media just enjoyed talking with him and interacting with him, and how, I remember, like, he would give his post-practice talks and everything, and I'd be like, hey man, I'll strap on the pads and play for you. Like, that's just how energetic he is and how much fun he is to work with. And to see him get the job at Oregon State is so awesome. And he's a guy where 2-3 years down the line, if that program is buzzing, he should be a Power 4 head coach. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
I like that one. I think that's a very good one. My other one was actually another G6 West Coast guy that I'm high on, Matt Entz.
That's an interesting. I like that,
because he was elite at North Dakota State, went to USC for a year, is doing good things at Fresno. Him and Grubb were the two guys that I thought, okay, this wouldn't. But Eck, if anybody told me Jason Eck is the guy, yes, great coach, love it.
Yeah, that's fine.
You can't argue it. Yeah. So, but Roman, I wanted to thank you for being here. I had a great time. This episode was awesome. It was great to talk about Husky football. I'll put all of your info, out so our viewers can easily follow you and Locked On Huskies. And I hope you have a good time at Big Ten Media Days next week.
Oh, thank you. I can't wait.
Good. So everybody else.